Hello everyone, this is Dr. K. Jagannayaki, Associate Professor, MBA Department, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Dundigal. So today I want to discuss about measurement of scales. See, in research methodology, after data collection, we need to organize the data, we have to analyze the data, and basing on that, we need to identify what type of data is necessary in a research study. So for that reason, we need to understand about various measurement of scales. See, data is a valuable asset as we all know. So in research, without data, nothing can be done. So to understand the data, we need to identify the right data. So after data collection, by using various sources, we need to segregate the data, what is relevant and what is irrelevant data. Only relevant data we are going to use to analyze the study further, and for that reason the measurement of scales, they help to organize the data properly and to identify the right data and to analyze the data, and whatever data you are going to analyze, that should be useful to have a positive impact and to understand and to determine what is the right solution to the existing problem. So that is the purpose of measurement of scales. So basically we have two types of data. One is qualitative data and another one is quantitative data. So qualitative data means it is discussed about the qualities or characteristics or attributes of a particular item or an individual person. So basically data is a collection of measurement or observations, so which have a meaningful sense. So that is known as data. So it may be of two types. One is qualitative data, another one is quantitative data. As the name itself it indicates that we used to describe about the qualities or characteristics of a particular person. It is purely descriptive and always textual in nature. And for example, if you want to describe the color of a person and the description about a particular vehicle like car, truck, so many things we used to describe. So it is always concerned with only two types of answers. One is yes or no. So always it should be in dichotomous nature. That is known as qualitative data, and quantitative data is that it is always numerical in nature. It is used to define information that can be counted. For example, you can count certain things in case of quantitative data. So whenever you are going to measure the distance, we used to say in terms of kilometers. If you want to measure the speed, height of a person, weight, everything can be measurable in terms of a numerical value. So we can easily differentiate qualitative and quantitative data. So in case of qualitative aspect, for example, if you consider number of books in a shelf, so that should be measurable in terms of a figure, a numerical value. So generally we used to say there will be 1,000 books, 10,000 books like that, which can express in terms of a numerical value. But whereas even the tall of particular shelf, that can be measurable in terms of some numerical value. So these are quantitative data. When you are talking about what is the color of the bookshelf, it may be of different colors, green, yellow, like that. So that is qualitative aspect. See, quantitative means, in simply if you want to remember, it's a numerical, and the data can be further divided into two types, discrete data and continuous. So in case of discrete data, it is a whole number that can't be divided and broken into individual parts. You cannot divide into fractions or decimals. For example, if you want to measure the number of pets, so you cannot mention that like 2.5, 3, 3.5 like that. We can able to specify they have one dog, two like that. So whenever the data which is not possible to divide in terms of individual parts like fractions and decimals, that type of data is known as discrete data. So this data is always we can express as a whole number. See, the number of wins someone's favorite team gets also a form of discrete data. Whenever if you are going to ask what is the chance of getting success or failure, so you never say there will be only two answers. Either you may succeed or you may have failure. Say a team can't have a half win. So whenever you are going to gain a win, then that should be as a whole number. Then continuous data is another one where we used to describe the values that can be broken down into different parts. So one can divide the new continuous data into fractions, decimals. So whenever you are going to measure the height of a group of people, there we used to specify some continuity among by giving some range 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40 like that. You can able to specify the data as continuous series. So temperature is another example of continuous data. So we used to mention different types of continuous data related to temperature and other things. Even if you want to talk about the marks of a particular group of students, that should be mentioned in terms of continuous data. So where we used to mention the range between how many students secured marks between 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50 like that, we can categorize the continuous data into decimals and fractions. Then the overall gist of the data, basically it is categorized into two types. One is quantitative, another one is qualitative. As we know, quantitative data, it is always expressed in terms of numbers. And we used to talk about like height, weight, speed, velocity, all these things, they come under the category of quantitative data where we can measure the data. And whereas qualitative data is non-numerical in nature, we used to describe certain characteristics or attributes about a person or an item. So that can be possible. And we have only dichotomous responses in case of qualitative data, either it may be in terms of yes or no. And qualitative data further divided into two types, nominal, ordinal, whereas quantitative data, it is basically categorized into two types, discrete and continuous. The continuous series further divided into interval data, ratio data. So interval means we used to give some sort of range, numbers with no differences between variables such as time. Even in case of ratio, numbers that have measured intervals where the difference can be determined, such as height and weight, that can be expressed in terms of ratio scales. Then they describes the qualities of data and non-numerical, right? It is used to define the information that can be further broken down into subcategories like nominal and ordinal. And coming to the properties and scales of measurement. So scales of measurement is how the variables are defined and how we have categorized the variables that should be related to the nature of the study. So according to the psychologist Stanley Stevens, he developed four common types of measurement of scales: nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval and ratio scale. So each scale of measurement, it has its own properties and that determines how properly we can analyze the data. So these properties are evaluated to identify and to understand the magnitude and equal intervals and a minimum value of 0. So every scale, it is used for a specific purpose. So coming to the properties of measurement, the first property is identify. So identify means we can able to understand what is the meaning of each value, whatever you are going to use in the research study, so that we can understand with the help of one of the property of measurement of scales, that is identify. And second one is magnitude. So magnitude means that the values have an order relationship. So what type of relationship they are having, and is there any specific order among the variables, that should be known as magnitude. And third one is like equal intervals. So equal intervals means whatever data points you are going to consider, those data points are equal. The difference between the data points 1 and 2 will be the same as between the data points of 5 and 6. For example, if you are going to take the range of marks between the students of a class, the range should be given like between 10 to 20, how many students secured in that range, then 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, like that. If you take the difference between any of the class intervals, that is equal. The difference between 10 and 20 is 10, 20 and 30, 10, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. Whatever interval you are going to take, they should have equal value. So it remains the same. So that type of property is known as equal intervals. The next one is a minimum value of 0. So a minimum value of 0, it means that the scale has a true 0 point. So generally we used to find in case of temperature and all. So the decrease, whatever you're going to consider, for example, they can fall below 0 and still have meaning. But when you are going to weigh something, its value is 0 means nothing will be there. You don't exist that one. So it is applicable only certain cases where we can use a minimum value of 0. By understanding the scales of measurement and their data, the scientists, they determined what type of statistical test we have to perform. It depends on the type of measurement of scale. So the first measurement of scale is nominal scale of measurement. See, as the name itself, it see that it is like to label something. So it defines the identity property of data. So the seal has certain characteristics that does not have any form of numerical meaning. For example, if you want to measure gender, so how we used to categorize this gender using nominal scale? Number 1, represent male, and 2, female, and 3, transgender. So it depends how we are going to identify a particular property of data, that is known as nominal scale. So the numbers, whatever I have given 1, 2, it do not have any numerical meaning. Just it is used to identify or locate a particular property of the given data. So the data can be placed into categories but cannot be multiplied, divided, added or subtracted from one another. So that may not be possible. Even if you take a team of football players, so for them also we used to assign some numbers. So what is the purpose of giving some numbers, number 1, 2, 3? So that we can easily locate the players in the ground. So that is the purpose of using nominal scales. So it's also not possible to measure the difference between data points. Examples are color of the eyes, country of birth. So these numbers, whatever you are going to assign to identify some property of the data that do not have any numerical sense. And nominal data can be broken into 3 categories. First one is nominal with order, second nominal without order, and third one is dichotomous. See, first one is like nominal with order. So here we used to subcategorize the data in an order. See, for example, if you are talking about the weather, anything, so how do you define that? Cold, warm, hot, and very hot. So we are following some order in that. So that is known as nominal data with some order. You are following is systematic criteria to identify the data. The next one is nominal without order. See, nominal data, they can also be subcategorized without order. See, for male and female, we never follow any type of order for that. So just like that, we used to categorize the gender by assigning some sort of numerical value. So that is known as nominal without order. Then another category is that dichotomous. So dichotomous data is defined by having only two categories. So we can have answers for a question yes or no type. So there will be only two options left over to the respondent. One is yes, otherwise no. So that type of data is known as dichotomous data. Then what are the properties of nominal scale? The first one is the numbers, whatever you are going to use in the nominal scale, that is used to label or just like the tag for identifying and classifying the objects. And when used for identification, there is a strict one-to-one correspondence between the numbers and the object. See, just now I told you gender, how do you categorize? So gender can be categorized into two ways. One is female and male. Whenever you are specifying the gender into different categories, one I am giving to female, two male. So there is no systematic role to assign or classify the data. And another one is a strict one-to-one correspondence between the numbers and the object. So one means strictly follow, it represents female workers, and two represents male, or vice versa, whatever it may be. So the numbers do not reflect the amount of the characteristics possessed by objectives. So that number, it do not have any significant meaning in case of nominal scales. And the only permissible operation on the numbers on a nominal scale is counting. So what is the purpose of locating or labeling certain objects? The purpose is very clear. So with the help of this nominal scale, we can have a count of how many objects, how many players are there. So when you are going to categorize the data on gender basis or based on the marital status, etc., we can able to count easily. So that is the purpose of using nominal scales. Only on with a limited number of statistics which are based on frequency counts are permissible, like percentage and mode. These are the appropriate measures in case of nominal data. Then second type of scale is ordinal scale of measurement. See, ordinal scale, where as the name itself, it suggests that there should be a specific order. Whenever you are going to place the objects, we used to follow a specific order. So that type of scale is known as ordinal scale. So each value is ranked. There is no information that specifies what differentiates the categories from each other. So you never specify how you are going to categorize, how you are going to differentiate the given data. That never include in ordinal scale of measurement. So just basing on the categories, we used to rank. So these values can't be added to or subtracted from. An example, if you consider, if you want to measure the satisfaction data points in a survey, so how do you find the satisfaction about a customer or an employee? So we used to assign some numbers. One means happy, two represents neutral, whereas three indicates unhappy. So where someone finished the race and also describes ordinal data. So first place, second, third, like that. We used to assign some numbers. So basing on the number, we used to identify the data, the position or the place of a specific person or specific object. So it does not specify how far the first place finisher was in front of the second place finisher. So we never find the difference between first and second units or first and second person. So just we used to specify the rank, first rank, second, third and fourth. That's it. So that is possible with the help of ordinal scale. Then coming to the properties of ordinal scale, the first property is that a ranking scale in which numbers are assigned to object indicate relative extent to objects possess some characteristics. So whenever you are going to consider some data using ordinal scale, so we cannot identify how a particular variable differentiate from other variables in what aspect that never disclosed in case of ordinal scale, and only we used to assign the numbers that represent the relative extent up to what degree these objects they relate to each other. So only that we can find out with the help of ordinal scale. And second one is that it can determine whether an object has more or less characteristic than some other object, but not how much more or less. For example, when I am saying A is greater than B, so only I can able to specify A is much better than B. So much better than I can able to say, but how much it is not possible to specify with the help of ordinal scale. So any series of numbers, whatever series you are going to take, that can be assigned to the preserves the ordered relationship between the objects. For that we need to follow a specific order, and basing on that we can able to analyze the data. So in addition to the counting operation allowable for nominal scale data, ordinal scale permit the use of statistics based on positional averages. So as ordinal scale, it used to rank the given object basing on a specific property. So it always tells us about the position of a particular item in the given data set. So it is purely based on positional values like percentiles, quartiles and median. Only these three statistical tools we can able to apply in case of ordinal scale. Then next one is interval scale measurement. So interval scale, it contains properties of nominal and ordinal data. So it is a combination of both nominal and ordered data, but the difference between the data points can be quantified. See, if you see the two other measurement of scales, whatever previously we have discussed, nominal scales, they are used to identify the data and nothing can be identified. And whatever numbers you are going to assign in case of nominal data doesn't have any sense. Only to locate or to identify the data you are going to apply nominal scales. Coming to order scale, here also we used to categorize the data by using a specific order, but it is not possible to find the difference between two data points, but that is possible in case of interval scale. So we can able to measure the difference between data points with the help of interval scale of measurements. So this type of data, it includes both the order of the variables as well as what is the exact difference between the variables. So for that reason, in case of ordinal interval scale, one can add or subtract the data sets from each other, but they cannot be multiplied or divided. For example, if you take 40 degrees is not 20 degrees if you multiply by 2. So that's what we have to understand in case of interval scale. See, this scale is also characterized by the fact that number 0 is an existing variable. So if you see that what is the meaning of 0, in case of ordinal scale, 0 means the data does not exist. In case of interval scale, 0 has some meaning. See, if you are going to measure the temperature and you are going to specify 0, it has a meaning 0 degrees. But that may not be possible in case of ordinal scale and nominal scale. So in case of interval scale, 0 has a meaning that already I told you. In case of temperature, 0, it indicates some sense. See, the data points, whatever you're going to consider under interval scale, have the same difference between them. So for example, you're talking about the range between marks, the difference between 10 to 20, it will have the same equal difference between 50 to 60 or 80 to 90. The difference in all the intervals, it resembles the same difference. This scale is used to quantify the difference between variables, whereas the other two scales, whatever you're going to use to describe the quantitative variables, they never consider, they used to describe only the qualitative aspects. The other examples of interval scales, which includes the year a car was made or the months of the year. So that can be measured in terms of interval scale. Then coming to the properties of interval scale, the first property is that numerically equal distance on the scale represent equal values in the characteristic being measured. See, whenever you are taking the intervals, it should be equal size. So this is the first property of interval scale. It permits comparison of the difference between the objects. So the difference between first item to second, second to third, fourth to fifth, so everything, it remains the same. So that type of scales are known as interval scale. The location of 0 point is not fixed. Both the 0 point and the units of measurement are arbitrary. So there is no fixed position to locate 0 point. So it may change basing on the unit of measurement, what type of data you are going to consider under a research analysis. Based on that, even the location of 0 point is also violated from one position to another position. So any positive linear transformation of the form y is equal to a plus bx will preserve the properties of the scale. So the y is equal to a plus bx, it exhibits a linear relationship between the data points. And statistical techniques that may be used include all of those can be applied to nominal and ordinal data. So in case of nominal data, we use only mode. In case of ordinal data, positional values we'll use. Whereas, in addition to the arithmetic mean and standard deviation and other statistics, whatever we are going to use in marketing research, so all the statistical tools are applicable in case of interval scale of measurement. The next type of scale is ratio scale of measurement. So ratio scales of measurement, it includes properties from all four scales of measurement. So we used to consider all the four scales, means nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale and ratio scales. All together we used to specify in case of ratio scales of measurement. So the data is nominal and defined by an identity, and that data can be classified in order and it contains intervals. Then after that we can easily categorize the data into an exact value. So that's how we used to include all the four properties of all the four scales in ratio scales of measurement. Weight, height and distance are examples of ratio variables. So in case of ratio scales, we can add, we can subtract, divide and multiply. So every mathematical operation we can use in case of ratio data. The number 0, it means that the data has no value point. So in case of ratio scales, they also differ from interval scales in that scale has a true 0. But whereas coming to ratio scale 0, it do not have any value point. An example of this, height or weight. If someone cannot be 0 centimeters, so 0 kilos, and you cannot specify the height, weight, speed, all these things in a negative value. So these ratio scales, they're especially useful in the calculation of shares and sales. So where we can apply ratio scales. Then what are the properties of ratio scales? It possesses all the properties of nominal, ordinal and interval scales. And it has an absolute 0 point. It is meaningful to compute the ratios of scale values. So every ratio, it will have a meaningful information. For example, if you take the positional averages or else correlation, so when you are going to specify the correlation coefficient, which is equal to plus or minus 1, it always ranges between these two. When I am saying that correlation coefficient is again a ratio. So plus 1 means there is a perfect positive correlation between the variables. It means that both the variables, they used to move in the same direction, either maybe upward or maybe downward. So this coefficient value, it gives some meaning. When I am saying r is equal to 0, it means there is no correlation at all. So that way we can compute the ratios with a meaningful values. So only proportionate transformations of the form y is equal to bx, where b is a positive constant, that are allowed, and all other type of data is not included in case of the ratio scales. Then all statistical techniques can be applied to ratio data. So after completion of this particular topic, one can able to understand what are the four scales of measurement that are used in research study and how do they organize the data and how one can analyze the data to have a positive impact in their relevant field. So the first type of scale is nominal scale, that is used for naming variables and which do not have a particular order. So that type of scale is known as nominal scale. Examples: color of eyes, labeling the players in a ground. So all these things, they are some of the examples of nominal scale. And coming to ordinal scale, which is used for variables in ranked order. So where we can give the priorities by assigning some ranks which is important and which have highest priority. So for that item we used to assign the first rank, next, second, third, like that. But the difference between the data sets is not determined with the help of ordinal scale. Example, if you want to measure the satisfaction level, so that should be categorized into three ways. One is happy, neutral, unhappy. So by assigning, one is assigned to happy, two represents neutral, neither happy nor unhappy, whereas three indicates unhappy. So that type of scale is known as ordinal scale. The next one is interval scale. So it is used for numerical variables with known equal intervals of the same distance. So intervals means there should be continuity and every interval, it will have equal difference. So that type of scale is known as interval scale. example, time, and you want to specify the marks of a particular class students and what are the along with their ranges that should be specified with the help of interval scale. Then fourth one is ratio scale, which is used for variables on a scale that have measurable intervals. So even if you want to measure weight and all, that can be possible with the help of ratio scales, and whatever value you can able to use with the help of various statistical tools, that will have a meaningful sense in case of ratio scale. So finally, what is the purpose of this measurement of scales means? We can use nominal scales to summarize and which are used to label or describe values. So with the help of nominal scales, we can describe certain properties of the data set. Using ordinal scales, we can able to provide information about the specific order of the data sets. So mostly ordinal scales are used in case of the surveys which are related to satisfactions. And next one is like interval scale is used to understand the order, and we can also able to find out the difference between the data points. That can be possible with the help of interval scale. And next scale is like ratio scale. Using this data, one can acquire more information about identity, order, and difference. Why? Because in this case, it possesses the characteristics of all other three scales like nominal scale, ordinal scale, and interval scale. And with the help of these ratio scales, we can have a breakdown of numerical details within each data point. So, thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.